Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So quite a lot of you have asked me about the champions that I think are going to be the MVPs for Season 5, or more specifically Season 5 Victory Track meta. So we do need to deal with two buff nodes. One is Blood in the Water 2, which basically just gives a passive fury to champions if opponents suffering from a debuff. And the second one is the more consequential one, which is long distance relationship. While close to the defender, attacker gains weakness debuff every 3 seconds, reducing their attack by 10%. Staying far away from the attacker makes them fall off. So that immediately gives us kind of like two types of offensive champions that will work the best. Number one will be champions that have very potent purification abilities. So if you can get rid of the weakness debuffs, then there's no real penalty for being aggressive, or in some cases you can even fuel your own abilities and gain extra damage, like in case with Kingpin, for instance. And then the second point is also the champions that do not need you to be super aggressive and in the opponent's face at all times will work pretty much as normal, because you will be suffering very little drawback, and that typically is something like parry heavy champions, or champions that have some slower rotations where you do not need to drop 3 combos within 15 seconds at opponent, where you do not need to consistently clock watch and see what's happening there. So let's take a look at some individual champions that I think will work great on offense or defense. Number one, from science class, Mr. Fantastic. Mr. Fantastic is going to be a great defender in this meta, because as soon as opponent is going to try and be more aggressive, they're going to start gaining weakness debuffs. And those weakness debuffs obviously will let him evade much more frequently, so he will require a hard counter. Not to mention that offensively he will function just as fine, because he is one of those champions that does not have to be super aggressive. You just need to basically parry heavy, drop some level 2s, and the fight kind of goes its own stable, slow pace. So he will not really suffer from these nodes offensively as well. So I do think he's going to be quite important. The second champion obviously is Void. Everybody's looking at Void for this Season 5, because as soon as you get a debuff on yourself, well, that Void's doing damage to you. So as soon as you try to be slightly more aggressive against Void, you're going to get a weakness, and that weakness will deal damage to you. If you try to stay away and purify those weaknesses, then Void will start stacking debuffs on you by himself, because there is that timer. And it is just quite a bad time again, and he will require a very specific counter in this meta. Now, offensively speaking, Jabari Panther should work extremely well, because in every single fight she will get a debuff that she will have the opportunity to cleanse, which means she will ramp up much faster, and that by extension means that she should be one of the more potent nuke champions in the meta. Obviously, we have Kingpin, who thrives in situations like that when debuffs get placed on him, so he will work offensively extremely well also. And then we have Shang-Chi, who has extremely potent purification abilities and a very solid damage output to back it up in Battlegrounds also. So Shang-Chi, in general, skill class seems to be the one that is going to be kind of in the foreground for this meta. And speaking of some of the newer skill champions, I will not include Baron Zemo in the description here, but if you do have one, I do think that Baron Zemo will work excellent as well. But Atuma, if you have recently pulled, should be doing quite well in this meta, because he has 100% chance on his heavy attacks to purify non-damaging debuffs, excluding concussions, and then replace them with concussion debuffs. And if you know anything about Atuma, then concussions basically make his whole kit work. So he's just going to work like he normally would, except supercharge, except he's going to be ramping up faster, except he's going to be doing more damage. And obviously he has some solid defensive potential as well. So I do think Atuma is a worthwhile investment for the upcoming season. I already took mine up to rank 3 as well, specifically for that. And then obviously we have Crossbones. If you have him awakened at relatively high sig, I do think he's going to be working just fine also. And then we have Elsa Bloodstone, who also automatically purifies these debuffs, so she is going to be doing quite a solid job as well. I do think we're going to see more Elsas around this time. And let's move on to the next champion, Mantis. Again, because of her Tranquilize, she will have those weaknesses fail against science champions up to 100% time. Against other champions a little bit less than so, but she is still high damage output champion that should be quite suitable for this meta. Now, speaking in other classes, again, as I mentioned, champions that do not require you to be consistently in opponent's face and then do deliver a high amount of damage. And Stark-Enhanced Spider-Man is going to be one great example of a champion that is still going to be extremely offensively capable, but will have little to no drawback, because with Stark-Enhanced Spider-Man, initially you basically just dex and you do not accumulate any weaknesses as you build up your poise charges, and then you drop your heavy attack if you must, and then you just kind of go in for the kill. So I do think that Stark-Enhanced Spider-Man will work pretty much fantastically in the upcoming meta. If you have one, definitely do give him a try. As I mentioned before, parry heavy type of champions where you can just parry heavy with Warlock should be doing a great job as well, especially in case of Warlock, where sometimes you do want to slow down the fight slightly anyways, just to make sure that his power draining abilities are keeping opponent under a bar of power or something like that. So I do think that Warlock is still going to be great, for instance, as well, or some other kind of parry heavy type champions that do not require you to be quite super, fast and aggro. And speaking of that, Hyperion also should be one of the better offensive options in this meta, because when it comes to Hyperion, it is extremely easy to keep opponent at a distance because you consistently keep spamming your special attacks or drop those heavies that throw opponent further in the screen. And then when they dash in at you, you just intercept them with the special, which again minimizes the amount of close contact you have with the opponent and kind of pushes them at a further distance. So I do think that Hyperion is going to work phenomenal in the upcoming meta. And then as a counterpoint to all of this, as I mentioned before, skill class is definitely going to be at the forefront of this meta, because skill class is the class that has debuff purification as one of the trademark class traits, kind of trademark abilities. And then with extension of that, I do think that Mutant Champion's main purpose here is going to be defense in this meta, to stop these skill champions that could be potentially running rampant. And in this case, especially Bishop, for instance, I think is going to be extremely powerful defensive option, because whenever opponents will purify those weaknesses, Bishop's abilities should kick in and deal amount of damage to them. Once again, debuff. Each time the opponent purifies a debuff, they instantly receive 3000 blah 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 energy damage. And skill champions also receive a passive stun if the debuff purified was a stun, but obviously that is not going to come into play. The thing that will come into play here is going to be the purification of debuffs and by extension taking energy damage. An interesting sense, I suppose, I think Jubilee could have a potential place in this meta in a similar capacity as Bishop does, where you just want to punish opponents' skill champions for purifying things. So could be worth testing out, but at the very least, Bishop definitely is going to be kind of like a very sneaky entrapment method, or just a very solid defensive placement, I think, for this meta. And when it comes to like Mystic class, again, what you do want to avoid is you do want to avoid champions that are consistently in opponent's face and super aggro. For instance, I don't think Dr. Doom is going to work very well as a Mystic champion in the upcoming meta. But champions like Tigra, who consistently change the distance and also, are fairly far away from the opponent, thus let those weaknesses fall off. And then champions like Longshot, again, who is in a higher degree like a parry heavy type of champion. What, again, you want to avoid from every class more than likely is going to be the champions that require you to be consistently in opponent's face and be super aggressive, like, for instance, Black Widow Clairvoyant or Dr. Doom, for instance. And Rintre is a definition of a champion that is going to be quite hindered with this node, because with Rintre it's all about cornering the opponent and smacking them in the face and, rooting yourself right at the opponent and then just hitting them with as many lights and block or face as possible. And all of that time weakness debuffs would be accumulating. So Rintre is kind of like a definition of a champion that you do want to avoid offensively, or more specifically, a champion that will not function as well offensively, in my opinion. So you want to look for champions who do not have this massive kind of like aggro push at the opponent, who do have some slightly different type of rotations. And that is more or less what I think about the upcoming season in Battlegrounds. Obviously, there will be other champions that I'm sure will function extremely well like Archangel. I didn't even want to bring that up because Archangel obviously is still going to be a great champion. We're going to have Domino, and Domino in skill kind of like popular metas is always going to be extremely powerful. And you know, the whole plethora of other champions that will work just fine, like Human Torch. This meta in itself is not extremely restrictive, and in theory you can use virtually any and every champion in this meta. It's just that with some champions you will find it much more difficult to kind of like maintain your damage output than with others. And the reason for that is because some champions require you to be really aggressive versus others don't. And the ones that don't in this case, kind of ironically, are going to be the ones that will likely finish the fights faster. But that is about it. Let me know what you guys think about the upcoming season. I will be trying to stream as soon as it starts. And yeah, I'm going to see you guys soon. Later. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about